Welcome, this is Jim, host of the Faith Influencer podcast, where we're going to dive into discussions on faith's role in everyday life, from navigating blended families to overcoming challenges. I'm a husband, a father, a Bible teacher, an advocate for applying faith to everyday life. So tune in as I share personal stories, valuable insights, and practical wisdom. Welcome, this is Jim Cunningham back again for our Faith Influencer podcast. Blended families, that's the direction we go. All things blended family. All things about what happens inside of a blended family. Should I consider blending a family together? All of these subjects we deal with. I hope that you're enjoying this. If you're watching this on YouTube, then like this. If there are other podcast platforms you're viewing this on, then follow. We want you there. So thanks for watching, and here's this subject for today that I want you to get ready for. Red flags. Red flags. Let's become more discerning about what's going on. Why is it, let me ask you a question, why is it that my grandmother, who was married to my grandfather for like 40 years, over a series of events that I won't get into, he started drinking, which was a prescription from a doctor way back then, but he became an alcoholic. And when he became an alcoholic, it changed everything, ruined everything, ruined their family. They got a divorce. It was awful. But why is it some years later when she remarried, guess who she remarried? Another man struggling with alcohol. Do you have a clue how many times that's true? Some of you know that that is true, that people tend to remarry the thing that they walked away from. But let me tell you something else. What about in a blended family? Do you know that many blended families who got a divorce originally because of some issues with their prior spouse that they just couldn't deal with, or there were so many things that they despised about their prior spouse, and yet they're looking to remarry a man and they're ignoring the red flags? He's got some of the same issues. She's got some of the same issues that were a struggle with you with your previous wife, but yet you're ignoring them again when you already have been through it. Why do we do that? So I want to be proactive, and I'm just going to list for you in today's podcast 10 red flags. If we get through all 10, we'll see. I'm going to give you some red flags so that we would be more discerning before we enter into a marriage relationship with someone. So let me say this. If you're looking to blending a family and you're dating this lady or you're dating this guy, and some of these red flags that I'm about to go through are waving at you, you cannot ignore them. The red flags that I'm going to say to you, show you today, ought to make you take pause and say, I need to slow this down, because if this is going to be how she is, how he is, then I'm thinking we probably shouldn't blend our family, or we may go right through the same divorce that I've been through before. So, are you ready? Let's walk through these red flags. They're self-explanatory, but here's number one. Maybe the biggest one that I get from as you respond is manipulation. Manipulation is such a red flag. I see it so many times. I was talking to a guy the other day. I literally felt sorry for him because he was dating this lady who was Psycho Lady. Psycho Lady was manipulating this guy in every way she could. And for some reason, he had these blinders on and didn't see that she was manipulating him. She was manipulating him into feeling guilty because he was spending time with his mother. She was manipulating because he didn't call her every night. They're not married. She was manipulating because she wanted to always choose where they ate and gave reasons why, or that he needed to buy her coffee every day, or all of these little princess things that she needed, and if he didn't do it or couldn't do it, then he didn't love her, or maybe they shouldn't be together. So I'm sitting down with him as he's describing to me, Psycho Woman. What do you think I said to him? Run. Put it in R and run. Because that is going to be a problem in your marriage, especially on the manipulation part. Let me tell you what else I said to him. These two were a little younger than me at least. Both parents were still alive. I said to him, I want you to do something. Don't mention it to her, but I want you to do something. I want you to see how she treats her parents, who were still alive. Go with her to her parents' house and see how she treats them. I would really be curious how she talks to her mother. Really be curious how she talks to her dad. If it's anything like I think it is, you ought to get out of this thing. So, red flag, manipulation. Manipulation means that they use guilt on you. They use other tactics to control you. That's a red flag, and you're probably, I'm not going to say 100% because God can do anything, but you're probably not going to overcome that one. Number 2, disrespect towards boundaries. You have to have boundaries. But people who ignore your personal or family boundaries, privacy, discipline roles, that's going to lead to issues. I really don't have to get into that one so much because you know what I'm talking about, that you have some personal boundaries, and if they step over those boundaries, that's a red flag. Here's the next one. Now, I hear this one a lot. I've been through this one. I've confessed this one to you in a prior podcast. I'm talking blended families now. Unequal treatment. Now, here's always the tendency. You've heard me say this before, but because there are a lot of people who are new on the podcast, I want to say it again. The tendency is always going to be to love and treat your children better than your stepchildren. That's always going to be the tendency. I don't even want you to feel guilty about that. That's just a tendency. You're not going to love someone else's child as much as you love your own child. I didn't say you're not going to love them. I said you're not going to love them as much. But that's different than unequal treatment. I have to be really careful about that. Now, I'm 15 years in, so I've kind of overcome that. But the tendency always was to show a little favoritism towards your own biological child. Well, that's going to create division. Thankfully, my wife, in a loving way, came to me and revealed to me some things that I really wasn't cognizant of, and that helped our relationship greatly, because when she showed me some of the things that I was doing, I was embarrassed. I was sorry for that. I didn't even realize I was doing that. So if there's unequal treatment, that is a red flag. That one can be helped. That one can be dealt with, but it's a red flag. If you see these red flags, don't get married until you've addressed them. That's why I always say you got to have a good Christian counselor to walk through these things before you ever get married. What's going to happen, by the way, if you say, well, I know it's there and you're ignoring it and you sweep it under the rug and you get married anyways? Well, you asked for it. I mean, you said, I'm not going to deal with it. So don't be surprised when it pops up in your marriage and becomes a huge issue, just like it did in your previous marriage. Here's the next one. A lack of interest is a red flag. What I mean by lack of interest, you're with someone who really isn't interested in building relationships with your children. That's what I mean. If they're not interested in spending time or building relationships with your kids, probably ought not get married. Probably ought not blend that family together. So a lack of interest in your children is a problem. Here's the next one. I hate this one. Excessive criticism. That's a red flag. Again, that often comes where, and in this case, it's usually the man who is more critical of his stepchildren. Excessive criticism, belittling the children, harms their self-esteem. It isn't good for their well-being. But more than that, you know what it does? It causes the biological mother to be resentful. So if you're with a guy and you find that he's always criticizing, criticism doesn't have to come in the form of anger. Some of you have said this to me in responding to some previous podcasts, that you're with a guy who always jokingly, as if it's funny, jokingly criticizes your kids. It's done laughing, but you know it's covered up by laughing. Excessive criticism like that is not something you want to live with. So if you see that red flag waving, then you've got to do something about it. Well, what do I do about it? You say, like all of these. Here's what you do. You go to, in this case, it's the man who is critical. You go to him and you say, honey, listen, I don't know if you realize this or not, but even sometimes under the guise of laughter, you're always criticizing my son. You're very critical of everything he does. Do you know that you do that? Ask him that question. If he becomes instantly defensive and is not willing to take responsibility, what do? You run. You cannot blend that family together. It's not going to work. Will you, this is what you ask, will you be willing? And I love this question, not in just this case, but in everything that we're going to talk about today. Will you be willing to go to counseling with me? That's like one of the key questions in all of this. That actually is going to help you know, should you blend this family. If you say to him, are you willing to go to counseling with me? And he says, no, I don't think we need it. That's an indicator this isn't going to work. If he says, yes, let's get this right, that's a good sign. I hope that's what he says. I hope that's what she says. So, excessive criticism. Here's the other one. Always undermining the other parent. Undermining the other parent. By that, I mean that the other parent has some values and some boundaries that they've set for their children, but you undermine those. When you have the kids, you do your own thing. When they're with you, you disregard that person's feelings, that other parent's feelings about those things. If you are undermining the other parent, that's an issue. Now, if you disagree, do you know how to be disagreeable in a good way? If you disagree, maybe with the stance that another parent has taken, maybe with the other parent isn't as strong as you are, maybe their values in a certain area aren't your values, how do you deal with that? Rather than undermining them in private, always in private, you have that discussion with that spouse. And if you can't come to an agreement, if there's something that hopefully they didn't see before, but if you can't come to agreement, what do? Just what I told you before. Honey, before we blend our families together, would you be willing to go sit down with some counseling with me and walk through these issues? Hopefully they say yes. If they say no, probably not a good match for remarriage. Let's go to the next one. Isolation. This is a problem sometimes because in two ways. One is because a parent is so bitter through a divorce that they want to isolate everyone from their kids from their biological father or biological mother. They want to isolate them. They don't want them to see them. They come up with all kinds of reasons to keep them away from that. That is very harmful to the children. That is very difficult for a child to go through because they want to see their other parent. We've been through that. I will say by way of testimony that there were times when I was in great disagreement with the lifestyle, et cetera, of the other parent, where I didn't want the children to be around them. But you know what? That wasn't my call. I can't isolate them from their other biological parent. Wasn't my role. And I sure am not going to step into that role with my wife's children and their biological father. That is not a place for me. I stay out of that. It's her decision and her ex's decision as they raise their kids together. I am not going to try to keep them away from him, even though I may want to. Even though I could give good reasons, doesn't work. So you can't isolate them from each other. So here's the next one. This is just relationships in general. This is just marriage in general, but refusal to communicate. Refusal to communicate. So now here you are. You're looking to blend a family together. You have kids. They have kids. And you're really considering bringing all of this together, and you're trying to walk through all of the pitfalls, and there's a bunch of them. Go back and listen to our previous podcasts. There are a bunch of them, and you're trying to communicate about these, and you're trying to be open and you're trying to be honest, and the person you're with is not willing to communicate about these things. Oh, it'll be okay, they say. No, it won't. It's never going to be okay by not dealing with something. They say, well, it'll work itself out. They say that's just avoidance. Avoidance doesn't work. You know what happens if you're with someone and you're trying to work through some issues? You're trying to build this foundation because you're going to blend a family together. At least you're considering it. You know what happens if you're communicating with someone and they're unwilling to communicate? You're going to build resentment. You're going to build resentment. And you know what's going to happen? Those things are going to show up later. They may not show up now, but you can mark it down. They're going to show up later and they're going to become an issue. So if you're with someone and they just can't communicate, I'm not saying you just sweep them out of your life because they're unwilling to communicate. But what I am saying to you is that you have got to work with that person, with a counselor, or with some good material on how to communicate. Now, I'm going to say, even though I know it goes both ways, I have talked to so many men who are bad communicators. I have so many times said in marriage counseling where this is what a man will say. A man will say, well, you know what? My dad wasn't a good communicator. I'm not a good communicator. That's just how I am. I don't like to talk about all that stuff. I want to grab that guy by the ear and twist it. I mean, so what? Your dad was not a good communicator. So what? You're not a good communicator. Learn to be. Learn to be. And there's good material about communicating. So let's move to the next one. Not only a refusal to communicate, but volatile behavior. Volatile behavior is an issue, and this is what I mean. I'm talking about people who have all of these mood swings. If you're with a woman and she is changing her moods from week to week, you're not going to be able to live with that. You're not going to be able to deal with that. If there are these big mood swings, how about this? Unpredictable behavior. How about if you're with a person and they have a temper and their temper shows up whenever it wants to, whoever it's going to hurt, saying whatever they want to say, and you don't even know that it's going on, that mood swing, that volatile behavior, you can't live with that volatile behavior. And then the last thing, sometimes people want to control the money strings. Well, you know, we communicate, my wife and I do. There's one person who pays the bills. I tend to lead in that direction, but that doesn't mean that we don't have discussions about it. Some of you say to me that your spouse will not even talk with you about anything related to the finances, that they want to control all of that. Well, is that an issue? It's an issue for many of you. So what do we do about that? Well, you discuss it. So do you see a pattern here? Do you see that there are red flags? I've listed them for you. You can't act like they're not there. You can't sweep them under the rug. They're going to show up and you'll probably go through a failed marriage again if you don't deal with them. So you communicate with your person that you're thinking about marrying and you say to them, let's go to counseling. You say to them, let's talk about this. You say to them, let's work on this. Let's read this particular book on this subject, or listen to this series of podcasts on this subject. And if they're unwilling to do that, then you're unwilling to blend your family with them. So those are some red flags that I wanted to give you today. Let me hear your responses to those. And as always, thank you for joining us. And this is Jim Cunningham with Faith Influencer.